Good morning, and thank you for joining me for the third in the 5-part series that we're doing on debunking the myths and dealing with the demand of human trafficking. Today I want to focus on a myth that many of us have probably believed just because as humans we always want to think in the positive. We always want to look at the people who we know well in the positive. And so oftentimes we believe that there's no way that my child could ever fall victim to human trafficking. So I want to really talk about that from a deeper place, less of a superficial place. But let's first just cover a couple reminders and a couple pieces of information to get us there. We talked about how force, fraud, or coercion is required in order for a circumstance to be legally considered human trafficking. In the case of juveniles, that is not the case. That does not have to be proven. We talked about how there's vulnerable populations, but that there's really not one demographic where you can say that these people are always at risk. And so human trafficking crosses all sorts of life boundaries: socioeconomic, gender, age, geographic. There's not one people population who are at necessarily greater risk than anyone else in the world. But there are populations of people who are more vulnerable to traffickers because they may be, we talked about homelessness. We talked about people who are survivors of other forms of abuse, but maybe haven't gone through a healing process related to that. And so in terms of our youth, one of the circumstances that we can really consider about how they could be put into a more vulnerable situation is just everyday, totally normal youth issues. Struggling with burdens about school, social circumstances, maybe bullying, maybe work demand, maybe demands at home, future demands, all of those things that when we are all in a place of growing and seeking independence and wanting to move more independently in our life, we're also kind of dealing with all of these burdens that we have to learn how to juggle and we have to learn how to deal with. And inherent in all of that is a need to be loved and a need to feel belonging in your circles, whether it's your family or your friends or other places where you connect. And so anytime there's a youth who's struggling with some of those normal everyday life things that we can't eliminate in life because it's the nature of maturing and growing up and experiencing things. But when there's someone also at the same time who's struggling with belonging and connection, and a trafficker whose primary objective is to target those people and then manipulate their circumstances, finds them, then that's where that risk is accelerated. And so we talked about social media being a platform where that happens. We talked about public places even where traffickers will sort of test the waters with youth to see do they answer in a way that leads the trafficker to believe that they would be an easy pursuit. Okay, so all of that said, at the end of the day, we've all believed lies. I have a very long testimony of lies that I believed my whole life but didn't realize I was believing. And as I walked through a journey of learning about those and understanding where I took them up in my life, and then breaking them and praying through them and starting to learn how God actually sees me and how that is so much better than the lie that I was believing my whole life about myself, I've learned and I understand a little bit more about how easy it is to take up a lie, and how easy it is in our flesh, in our human nature, how easy it is to believe something that's not true, whether it's about the circumstances around us or just about who we are and ourselves or how we were created. And so through that process of learning and then learning about human trafficking, what I've been able to understand as I've looked at some of the stories of victims and overcomers, and even looking at my own personal circumstance right now, raising children and seeing some of the things that they're struggling with, and maybe remembering a little bit about what it was like to be at those places in my personal life, in school, and all those different youth experiences. I've been reflecting a lot on what are some of those lies that we might easily take up in those places of our life because we feel vulnerable or insufficient, or even, looking at the people around us and they have that thing and I don't, or they get to go on that vacation and I don't, or she always has the best clothes and I don't. Those are all real things that our youth struggle with. And they're all the things that a trafficker is going to use to pursue meeting that need that a youth has. And so because we all have believed lies, and because we all are vulnerable to still believe lies, that means that traffickers have a niche in a market that's never ending. It's a never ending opportunity, because every single one of us has the potential to take up the lie that they might feed to us, because they're so crafty and so intentional about speaking into the thing that they recognize as a vulnerability for us. And so then we can't cancel out anybody, even our own kiddos, even our grandkids, even the great kid across the street who's got great academics and is involved in sports and babysits your kids and is always home on time. They're just as equally at risk for believing a lie as you and I are. And so I am convinced that the only way that we can really be assured that the people in our lives who are vulnerable to traffickers, the youth that we know, or the people who we serve in some community, the only way that we can be assured that they're building a foundation of truth, that they're not gonna, or that they be less likely to believe a lie about themselves, is to be sure that they know where the source of truth is, to be sure that they know who Jesus is for them, that he died for them, that he desires nothing more than to have relationship with them, and that he is so kind and so good, and all he wants to do is have relationship and encourage them in their life. I think there's all sorts of books and probably a multi-million-dollar industry out there that we could spend all sorts of time reading books about how to prevent human trafficking. But I think in my heart what I know, and what's maybe a little bit hard to communicate because I'm sure there'll be people watching who will disagree with this. But in my heart what I know is that the only source of truth is Jesus. And when I wasn't living for him, I believed all sorts of lies about myself. And those lies impacted every circle of my life. But it was only when I started living for him that I was able to break those lies, and that I was able to understand that I am worthy, that I am sufficient, and that there's something better for me. So that's the truth we've got to speak to the young people in our life. They are worthy. They are sufficient. They are totally, completely, insanely adored and loved by their Creator. And he's got something better for them. I hope this blessed you today. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next week as we debunk the last myth about human trafficking.